You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers.
Hello and welcome to the Stacked Podcast, episode number 64, recorded on February 24th, 2023. I am your host, Kito Man, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Josh Juno and Ian Hlabitz. Hey, guys.
Hey, Kito. Hey, everyone.
How are you?
Good. I'm doing okay. Ian, I'm sorry. Dano couldn't be here with us today. He, I think, was training or something. So it's three of us. And we've also got a couple really awesome guests that I will introduce you to in just a minute. First off, Josh, how are you doing? And Ian, you haven't been on the podcast in a while, so it's good to see you.
Yeah, I missed a few, unfortunately, but things were busy. But back on track for 2023, and excited for the year ahead. A lot of new technologies coming out, and a lot of existing technologies continuing to be great and awesome to work with, and lots of fun doing what we do in the Java UI space for sure.
So, what have you guys been up to?
I can just start and just let you know. Recently my family actually just went on a cruise, all of us. So it was really nice to all be able to go. Hadn't been on big vacation for a while, so really nice to get away. So I'm back now. That's what you see in my background on the cruise ship, where I wish I still was, even though the Wi-Fi was not so good there.
Where'd you go?
We just took a 4-day. We went to the Bahamas, went to Nassau, and then island called Half Moon Cay or Key, however you'd like to pronounce it. Okay, and that was probably the best place I've ever been on Earth.
Cool.
It was nice. Nice and deserted. It was a good time, and everything's been going really well, keeping busy with work and all the Apache NetBeans and Jakarta EE emails and everything. It's just been, going well. There's lots of change going on, and it's good.
Very, very cool. Cool. Anything new with you, Ian, other than what you said before?
Just, we were talking about beer a little bit before the call, and I'm trying to set up a little bit of a home bar kind of setup with a keg. So I'm learning like a lot about, bar equipment, beer storage, and all the plumbing and stuff you need for just talking about hobbies for a sec. But it helps a lot. I mean, it's fun. You have a few friends over, you can pour a couple of beers on top. So that's the goal, is just to have like a home bar kind of thing. So, awesome. But yeah, things are good. Just, trying to stay active. Obviously it's in our line of work, a lot of sitting involved. So, doing the home gym thing, like with my wife about a couple times a week, and just trying to ramp that up a little bit more and work off some of those holiday pounds for sure.
Nice. So people don't know this about Ian, but he's like a super duper flamenco guitarist too. So he's one of those people that takes their hobbies to the extreme. So. Yeah,
I definitely like playing guitar, and that's definitely one of the main motivators in my life for sure. It's all about work-life balance, right? I think I take that to heart, because if you work hard, play hard. That's the way I see the thing. So just try to get the most out of life, on both sides. But no, things are really good. Definitely, like I mentioned, some new technologies coming out, like AI is a big thing now. Like this chat GTP is coming into the picture, which, going back to our previous podcast where we were talking about like AI coding assistants, right? Yeah. Like GitHub Copilot is also based on the OpenAI model. So it's interesting now to see like a chat interface from Microsoft. We have two experts on the call today from Microsoft. So it'll be interesting to hear. We can, get into some of that, hopefully, discussion later. And among the many products that Microsoft is, obviously involved in. So, I think it's interesting to see. Some of my friends have been really jumping into the chat GPT thing and having a lot of fun and asking for advice and like getting like part of their work done with it. And so I can relate, because when I discovered the GitHub Copilot for coding, man, this is great. Like all the grunt work is gone now from my writing your getters and setters and doing refactoring. Like there's a lot of things your IDE can do for you, but at a certain point, it's like you have to do the work yourself. And now if you have like an AI coding assistant, it figures out pretty fast what you're trying to do. And with a couple keystrokes or even a single line comment, you can have it generate, pretty decent code. So that's been a big, improvement, I think, in my programming life. But yeah, again, like it's an interesting thing that happens in your brain is because it's almost like letting the car drive itself, right? At some point you're like, wait a second, no, I should be driving this thing, like it's, so I feel that there's definitely benefit, but you still want to stay engaged, like,
Yeah. I know what you mean. Like I haven't used it in a while, but I have a Copilot subscription too. So,
Cool.
All right. So I just wanted to say, let's see. I don't have a whole lot to say about what I've been up to. Just working with different clients. Working a lot with Capacitor mobile apps. I'm actually doing a webinar on that with Ionic next week. And also, Java stuff, and working with clients and that kind of stuff. I've also been sick lately with COVID, which has been a lot of fun. But I'm glad I'm actually feeling normal today, so it's a good deal.
Hybrid immunity. I read recently, hybrid immunity is a good thing. So if you've been vaccinated and you get sick, like, hey,
well, that's what happened, right? So that doesn't explain why I get sick twice within 2 weeks. But hey, it's all good. But before we ramble on too long, I want to introduce our guests. So we've got two awesome people here that we've known for a long time, and I'm just thrilled to have them both on the show. So we've got Reza Rahman, who is the principal program manager at Microsoft, or one of probably hundreds of principal program managers at Microsoft. And also Ed Burns, who is a principal engineer at Microsoft.
Hello.
And guys, we're thrilled to have you. If you don't know these guys, they've been in the enterprise Java, Jakarta EE, whatever, the Java world for decades now, or at least a decade and a half.
2004 was when I started with.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
So 2004 is when I started with JSF 1.0.
That would be one. Oh my God, we're so old. Okay. Yes. So I will, instead of just telling you how awesome they are, I'll let them tell you themselves. So Reza, why don't we start with you? Tell us about yourself, what you do at Microsoft, and just a bit of your background in general.
Sure. So, I've been in the industry for a long time now. As I said, I've been involved with what was known as Java EE, I think, since 2000, 2001, something like that. In the JCP. Before that, I'm an author. I've been speaking for just about that long, since about the early 2000s. I was essentially even Java EE evangelist at Oracle for some period of time, alongside Arun Gupta. I don't know how many of you remember him. But yeah, these days I'm at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft actually a fair bit of years now already, more years than I would have expected or imagined, actually, to be honest. So what is my job? As Kito said, I'm a principal program manager, but I'm also principal program manager for Java on Azure. So what that means is I'm actually ultimately responsible for sort of the well-being of Java customers, people using Java on the Azure platform. But more specifically, I have a sub-area focus, and that is very much aligned with what I have been doing for, as I said, since almost 20 years, a little more than 20 years at this point. And that is to enable basically the Java EE flavored runtimes on Azure. Specifically, this would be things like WebSphere, WebLogic, JBoss EAP, Open Liberty, WebSphere Liberty, and these days, of course, even things like Quarkus, and enabling all of those runtimes, on the Azure platform. And basically, we do that in an ecosystem way. So we basically work with respective companies, IBM, Red Hat, and Oracle, and VMware, Pivotal, Broadcom, whatever you want to call them these days, those folks as well, right? And in addition to that, last year we actually joined the Eclipse Foundation as working group members for both Jakarta EE and MicroProfile. So a lot of things going on. From my standpoint, I'm basically doing the same kind of things that I care about and have cared about for a couple of decades now, only at a maybe slightly unusual company. At this point. Okay, with that, let me stop there. I think that's enough of a background.
Actually, I was just hoping to jump in, Reza, about that, because I remember when I first became aware of you, and I think we met previously at a conference or.
Can you just pause for a second? Because I know Ed has to get off camera.
Oh, yeah. Sure. No worries.
I'll let him go first for the 3 minutes he has left before he has to leave the camera. Then we can loop back to Reza.
Yep, sure.
So Ed.
Yes. Let me actually call in on the phone. I'm trying to enter the meeting password, but I don't know how to enter the meeting password numerically. Do you know how to do that?
I can't say that I do. Let me see if I can find out what the meeting password is.
There's a alphanumeric password, but I don't see. It hung up on me. All right.
Oh yes, I see what you're saying. It's not. I think I know what you mean. There's a way that you can do it if you have.
And I was about to just use the alphanumeric numbers thing, but then I came to the hyphen.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find a thing here.
Doesn't Microsoft make Zoom?
No,
I'm joking.
No, it's
maybe it's that number. Maybe it's that long number
Harvard.
5612. Let me try that. I bet that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I bet that's it. Eight 4212 1620. Okay, yeah, and let me try this. Okay. 56125 36912.
Yeah, that's it. I'm seeing it now.
Hello.
Am I in the meeting?
You are indeed.
All right, great. Well, I'm really happy to be here, and it's great to hear some old friends again. Ian and Kito and Josh and I go way back, and I'll start with Josh. I want to start by just jumping in and saying, how I met you all and how you have come in to enrich my life and how I'm happy to be still in there. And I'll start with Josh because in some sense, he has had the biggest impact for all of us here. And that may surprise some, but your blog post about JSF and the commit tracking of commits from Oracle was really the shot across the bow that started the momentum of getting Jakarta EE to be created eventually. It started the momentum, and Reza joined along with the Jakarta Java EE Guardians. That was a really successful project, and it was amazing at the time because it was like Oracle, for those of you that don't know, Oracle had delivered Java EE 8. Or actually, no, they canceled the delivery of Java EE 8, and they said, yeah, we're not going to really bother with this anymore. And but they didn't tell anyone. And so Josh had a blog post where he kind of noticed this. He's like, here's a bar graph of commits and interaction from Oracle on the JSF specification. And this was kind of the early 2008 or so. It was like a letter writing campaign, right? It was people called in and basically started a groundswell of movement that eventually caught on and became Jakarta EE. So I'd like to really thank you, Josh, personally, all these years later, for your role in that. Are you aware that that had such a big impact?
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. And I have heard that it had a big impact, and I'm just glad to have been able to bring that to attention. And I want to thank Reza for also working along with me on that initiative.
That is awesome. I actually don't remember that. I think I missed that blog post. So
yeah,
it's awesome.
It was actually at a point where I kind of was able to find some resources on the different public websites, and I was able to gather information, and I just basically compiled it and put it into an email and a blog post, and it worked, and I'm glad that it caught some attention.
Well, and I'd like to point out that this is also enabled by the fact that JSF and the implementation, O'Hara, was the first part of any kind of Java server or client that was actually ever open sourced. So if you look at OpenJDK and you're like, oh, it's great, it was Java that was open sourced. Well, that road was paved by the JSF implementation going out there first. And that's something that I'm extremely proud to have had a little hand in happening. And so the open spec world of JCP and the open sourced software of Sun was what enabled Josh to collect the data that made the blog post. And it just goes to show what I really think is the importance of transparent operating. And coming to Microsoft, Microsoft as a company has some DNA that is the exact opposite of transparent. You may remember some of the way Microsoft was run apparently under Ballmer and Gates before Satya Nadella came and turned things around. It was a very closed operation. It was the opposite of a growth mindset. There was privacy is power. Each group was not telling the other group what they were doing. And not only were they not telling, but they were kind of like scheming to undo what the progress the other groups were making. Well, the growth mindset that we're having at Microsoft now is the opposite of that, where we're open and sharing and trying to change the culture around so that it's the opposite of privacy is power. It's being open is power and recognizing that we're all on the same team. So in the micro level of this, having Jakarta EE come from the transparency that we had in JCP and Sun with the community effort of tons and tons of people, and a special shout out to many champions inside of Oracle, first and foremost, Ed Bratt, who had done a ton of groundwork to get all the IP scrubbed and everything to make it happen. Very thankless and very tedious, very essential work is something that I also want to mention. So, and then I'll talk about Kito and Ian. Kito, of course, was part of the JSF expert groups early on and had worked on JSF components, had done a successful JSF book. So that's how I came to know Kito. And Ian joined the JSF expert group a little bit later in the JSF 2.0 range, and also had some component and testing work I think you were working on. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, helping with some of the data collection at one point. You were asking for, kind of statistics on the repos, and I was kind of an active observer, I think, on the mailing list more than really hands-on participant. But I really appreciated being part of that expert group and having the opportunity. Actually, you invited me later and to kind of attend remotely and participate in one of your talks at a tech conference talking about JSF.
I remember we did that.
Yeah, the front-end frameworks, right? The SWOT analysis for JSF. And so it was really fun to be able to share ideas and collaborate with that community. Obviously, I had written a couple of books on JSF, and I had initially got into it through my Dreamweaver plugins for Adobe, which was really, I think, the first connection we made.
JSF Toolbox for Dreamweaver.
Yes.
Yeah, I used that.
Oh, man.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
It was fun. It was actually a lot of fun to build that product, those plugins. I learned a lot about Java as well, like bootstrapping a JVM inside a native C desktop app on both Windows and Mac, like through the Java native interface. Like that was a real learning curve. And then, on top of that, so it was fun. On top, doing all the IDE stuff, parsing your libraries, like scanning your HTML, your facelets, XHTML files, and and providing some kind of design time experience for the developer in the Adobe world, where, Adobe was never really a big, Java supporter, but we managed to shoehorn, get the JSF into their products. So I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. And I remember being part of that community around the time when Facelets was integrated as a standard view handler for JSF, with Jacob Hookham's contribution to JSF, and how amazing that was. I watched that code migrate and make its way into JSF 2.0, become part of the framework itself, and how amazing that was for JSF, like for developers to be able to have this super fast Sax parser running in your UI framework, web framework, to build your compared to the JSF, the JSP based component tree approach to going back to that time. It was a big improvement in performance, and the developer experience improved a lot. So JSF was a great experience for me. I've kind of moved on since. I think we've all kind of moved on in our own ways, but I always have great respect for that framework and that ecosystem. And
I have one aside. I was playing with Chat. I finally got around to playing with Chat GPT recently. I was late to the party because it takes time, and I'm like, it's just worth my time right now. Eventually, I decided it was worth my time. So I actually asked it to write a JSF composite component just to see if it could do it. Yes. Yeah. It spat out Facelets code.
Seriously?
Yes. But it couldn't quite get the whole composite component. It basically gave me like the body, and first it considered a component just, having the markup with code behind it. And I'm like, but this isn't an actual composite component. Can you make it a composite component? And I tried, and I couldn't get it to actually do the whole full JSF2 composite component thing, but it did Facelets and stuff. It tried, Yeah. And I'm thinking, funny. Wow, this is just amazing that, this little that little open source project that Jacob wrote so many years ago that we integrated into JSF. And now we're asking like an AI agent how to write code in it. Because I thought that would be more interesting than like, okay, can you write some algorithm in Java?
Yes, I agree. That is a good question. And to bring back on that composite component thing, that was one of the features in JSF 2.0 that I was most proud of, because it really leveraged a lot of what had gone before. And, being able to have the interface and implementation sections, and being able to include nested Facelet pages and define your component completely declaratively. There's a funny thing. I'll speak quickly about what I'm doing at Microsoft as part of Reza's team. So I have to thank Reza also for, and laying the groundwork for me to come into Microsoft as part of the Java EE effort. So we're trying to make Azure a great place for Java EE apps, and we've done this by partnering with the big three app server vendors, Oracle, IBM, and Red Hat. And part of why this is a dream job for me is that I'm still working in the space, still working on the same people that I worked with before. They're dear friends from the Java community and all three of those vendors. And but to tie it back to Facelets, the way we've chosen to expose these app servers to Azure users is through a thing called an application, Azure application, otherwise also known as a solution template. And so in Azure, their infrastructure as code language, you can use Terraform, and a lot of people do, but the native language, the domain-specific language for doing infrastructure as code in Azure is called Bicep, and it is its own DSL for doing Azure infrastructure as code. And when you produce an Azure application, you write it as Bicep, and Bicep lets you access all of the Azure resources. So what we do, for example, running WebLogic on Kubernetes, we have to stand up a Kubernetes cluster, stand up an Azure Container Registry, install the Oracle WebLogic operator, set up virtual networks and pods and all of that stuff that you have to do to stand these things up. You can do that in Bicep, but to expose that in the Azure portal, you have this thing that they call a declarative user interface. And the first time I saw this, I was like, I heard about it. I'm like, oh, that's great. I know declared user interfaces. That's what I used to do. But the way that they have chosen to author it is in JSON, just plain JSON. So imagine having to write an entire UI, knowing what you could do with JSF, with buttons and clickers and drop downs. And, the component set is much smaller than what we had in JSF. Right. But instead of doing it in XML and faceless, you have to write the whole thing in JSON, this plain old JSON. It's horrible.
Is it the strict JSON with no comments, or can you?
No, you can put JSON C. You can put comments in. Yeah, okay, it gets stripped out, but at least you can do that.
I've seen this with I work with an insurance client, and they use this insurance product called Guidewire, and it's React based, the UI, but they have built their own stuff on top of React, where you declare most of it writing JSON as well. And whenever I look at it, I'm just like, it's like it's not good for that stuff. But Ed, did we actually say like what your role was with JSF? Did we say that?
Well, we didn't say it, but I'll say it quickly. I was very honored to. Well, it's funny that Ian mentioned JNI, because one of the earlier jobs I had at Sun was on the Sun AOL Netscape Alliance. And that business deal was a thing where Netscape sold the server-side business to Sun, and that became iPlanet. And the Netscape side, went to AOL. So AOL was kind of like, hot in the late 90s, and, it was starting to go down at that point. But at one point, AOL owned the assets for Netscape. And so Sun was a part of this, because the early versions of Netscape had Java in them with Applet. And I worked on the team that did OJI, the Open Java VM Interface, which was a part of the early JDKs. And in order to integrate with the different browsers at the time, that was done with JNI. So I did have some experience with that. But that was the last time I worked in, real native code. Then I saw the opportunity to move over to the server side at the beginning of J2EE and work in the implementation team for JSF 1.0. So at the time, that was being led by Amy Fowler, who this was kind of her second act after being the Spring. Was it Spring? I guess not Spring. Sorry, Swing.
Swing, right.
The Swing lady, and also AWT. So, but yeah, Swing had come out, and Swing was a pretty decent component framework for its day, since replaced by Java FX, which is, I think, an even better one. But she moved over to the server side and said, basically, we're going to do something like Swing, but for server-side Java. Because at this point in time, frameworks were, the framework wars were just starting to take off in the Java space. So they had hired Craig McClanahan, who was the person who did struts. Yes. And he was also on the JSF team, and I joined him. So it was the early JSF team was like me and Craig and a few other engineers. And eventually I came on to assume the role of co-spec lead along with Craig, because the work got too thick. And then Craig moved on from Sun to his own company. And I stuck around with JSF, and I'm really glad I did, because we built a beautiful community that at time really spanned the globe and had collaborators from all over the place. And I'm very proud of the work we did. I'm very proud of the example of openness and collaboration that it set. I'm hoping that other people can be inspired by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the coolest things that came out of the JSF community, that openness and the collaboration, was that just the sheer quantity and quality of third-party component developers, and we still see that today. Like you had the Apache Foundation with the Trinidad and Tomahawk components. We had like iSoft, we had Prime Faces, we had lots of different vendors, right, delivering, making their own rich faces and
face. I'm sorry, Oracle AX was one as well.
From Red Hat, right? Yeah. We had a lot of players.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And also what I think is pretty cool is that it's still, I mean, obviously there's not a whole lot of component vendors. It's not a hot, cool technology anymore, but I'm just thrilled that people are still working on JSF and moving it forward. I think that's just pretty awesome.
I'm still on the My Faces mailing list. It's pretty amazing. I get these digest emails. I never turned it off, so I'm still getting those, like a lot of bot traffic, like commit bots that are emerging PRs and things like that. But there was a lot of people are working really hard on those libraries, and that was the inspiring part. Was that, wow, look, this framework lets like the community really contribute, get involved, and developers benefit greatly from that. So it was a good, a great experience working together on that. And like the architecture of JSF, like you mentioned Craig McLanahan and Strut, Ed, and that was definitely my introduction to Java MVC, was through Strut. I mean, I did some Swing, and Swing has kind of an MVC, art design as well, more of a, like the Model 2 style, but yeah, that pattern of components that emit events and that have a model, and there's a controller. And Kito, your book really kind of broke that pattern down for me. That was the clearest explanation I ever saw of MVC, was like controller has a model. Like that phrase in itself for me was like a eureka moment. Like, what? Okay, you always get confused. A model is a controller? No, controller has a model. Like that was such a clear insight from your book. But anyway, the architecture is still around today, and we use it with Angular. We're using it with a lot of web frameworks. You still use that MVC pattern. So
it
was a useful experience too.
Yeah, I found when I first started working with Angular 2 and higher, I was just like, wow, this really is a lot like JSF with CDI. I mean, pretty much.
Yeah, and that's it. And if you look at the TypeScript language too, another great product from Microsoft that I personally really like to work with.
Great.
It's getting closer and closer and closer to kind of a Java TypeScript environment. Like the language level support for the things that you kind of take for granted, like final parameters in a function or method, right? Like that's still not available, right? It's coming up. We have that on our show notes, like TypeScript 5 beta is coming up. And that's one of the features, is the const keyword for a method parameter. And Java had this stuff for years and years. Final is like a language keyword from almost the beginning, I would think.
I still like const better than final var personally, but so go ahead.
Well, we gotta call out though that nothing that we're talking about here was even new by the time JSF got around to it. It was all old ideas going back to Smalltalk. So one of the things I really enjoyed during the heyday of the working on the JSF was the opportunity to get to know a lot of the big other players in the Java space. So I put this book out where I got a chance to interview all of them. It's an old book now, but it's still evergreen. The Secrets of the Rockstar Programmer's book. But the thing I want to mention is one of the people I talked to there was this guy, Max Levchin, who I went to college with, but he was also one of the co-founders of PayPal and Yelp, and he's personally like the only one I know personally who's like been to Davos and stuff, and who's been in the Wall Street Journal, and has had a stipple art done of him, the Wall Street Journal stipple art. That's to me like the real benchmark of success. If you ever get a Wall Street Journal stipple art thing, you really know you've made it. But anyhow, when I was talking to him about the book, he's like, there's been nothing new since 1967, really. I mean, but we can't say that anymore. We can't, because with ChatGPT now, this is LLVM is a pretty great new thing, but LLM, large language models, is also totally new. So that's part of the reason why people are going so nuts about it, because everyone knows in computer science, yeah, man, there's nothing new. We're doing MVC, we're just calling it a different language, but this is net new. This is what we're having with large language models, and I don't even know much about it at all. I'm learning it from the outside, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, I do feel like, for those of us who were there when the internet, I was in college when the internet really took off, like when, I think I'm a couple years younger than you, Ed, but I was in college when Mosaic came out. I remember I was proctoring a couple computer labs at the time. The internet was like the biggest thing ever, right? And had pretty transformative effect on society. Now some of it really annoying, but anyways, and I think, the whole AI thing, we kind of knew it was going to happen. I think it happened quicker than I thought, probably quicker than a lot of people thought, but I think it's the next big thing. So.
I know. And so here's a really funny full circle thing, and I won't dominate anymore because I want to get Reza back in here, but I do want to share this. You mentioned, Kito, having exposure to HTML in college. So when I graduated from the University of Illinois in 1995, I had the really great fortune to be a student programmer at NCSA. So I got to work on NCSA Mosaic for X. And that was the first graphical web browser. And I joined that group after all the cool kids like Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina and Rob and Mike McCool. They had just gotten swept up by James Clark and formed Netscape in Silicon Valley. And I came in about 6 months after they all left and did that thing with Mosaic Communications Corporation, which eventually was named Netscape. And then, of course, Chris Wilson and John Littlehauser. So some of these people were in the Rockstar book. But the thing I want to mention is being a student programmer at that point in time in the College of Computer Science, or the Computer Science Department in the College of Engineering at U of I, everyone had their own web page. All of the engineering students got their own web page on the main server that they ran. And so everyone kind of knew basic HTML because there wasn't that much to know. HTML 1.0 was really, really, really simple. And JavaScript hadn't been invented, CSS hadn't been invented. But even so, if you graduated around that time and you could write a simple web page, you could also write your own ticket to whatever job you wanted. And so that was a golden experience that I had, and I credit my luck at being around at that point. But my son is now a sophomore in computer science at University of Central Florida, and he is doing the AI stuff. So, and he's in on the early stages of this as well. So he's in the entrepreneurial program, and he's doing a startup there called ToolCharm, and they do AI-assisted process automation. And the fact that he's learning these things at his age, he's only 19, I look back and he got lucky too, being in on a thing that was just taking off and being at the point in your career where you could ride the crest of it. So that's a really big blessing that I'm able to say.
That's awesome. Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm kind of. You have to keep us posted on what happens with all that, Ed. I'm curious.
Yeah.
In my college days, we created a company because we liked Netscape. So it was me and a friend of mine, and we were one of the many companies that got created and didn't actually do anything. So we created a company called Virtua Communications Corporation, and we tried to do stuff and didn't really do anything that came to anything. I just kept the name after I left. I kept the first part of the name, but yeah. So awesome. Well, we should probably move forward a bit. So let's see.
I'd like to jump in and ask Reza some questions. What's getting to that earlier? Just want to touch on that previous chat we had back in 2017. You were on our show back then, actually, Reza, if you remember, episode 37, right? You were still with Oracle, and you introduced yourself as a Java developer advocate and Java evangelist at Oracle. And since then, you've moved to Microsoft along with Ed. And I'm curious to know, like, how has it been for you, like the transition between Oracle to Microsoft in terms of its Java culture? And historically, we think of Microsoft and Java as being, antagonists. Like back, everyone remembers the Sun Microsoft lawsuit, and when Microsoft tried to extinguish Java, right? By the Microsoft JVM that had proprietary extensions and broke the user agreement, and they got sued and they lost and they gave up, and it became .NET and C# and all those other spinoffs. But it was the kind of first managed environment for developers where memory management was done for you. But it was, back then it was a big deal. So today, you mentioned earlier, it's a completely different company, right? Like how is Microsoft today with Java support, and how has your experience been?
My experience has been good. It is the right, sort of what Ed and I have been. If you track our movement, it's very reflective of what is going on in the Java space in a manner of speaking, right? So I think we've moved on from the battle for the desktop and the server-side operating systems, and in fact, dare I say, we may even may have moved on from the language battles as well. I think now it's a very different world where we are talking about essentially cloud platforms and what is the best cloud platform and where does Java fit in there. And I think the fact that we are at Microsoft doing what we are doing is effectively a testament to where Java is in the cloud space, right? If you are to be relevant as a public cloud, you have to be relevant in the Java space, right? And that goes with a whole host of things that you can say about that. But Microsoft itself actually has fundamentally changed as a company as well. It's a very different company than what it was under Gates and under Ballmer, and that is also a reflection of where the industry is, right? Where there's today's battles and yesterday's battles, if you will. And there's no point fighting yesterday's battles anymore. So, yesterday's battles entails yesterday's mindset, and today's battles require a different mindset. So Microsoft, as a result, under Satya, really has become a very different company. We are more focused on becoming an ecosystem, a place where many different things can succeed. Java being and seeing Java successful, in that space is very important, and which is why Microsoft ultimately recruited people like us and are basically empowering people like us to do what we believe in. So yeah, I think more or less it's a good journey so far. There's still a long way to go. A lot of people still do think of Microsoft in those old terms. Some of it is earned, deserved, some of it is not. But we are working to essentially make Java rightfully successful on one of the largest public clouds in the world.
Absolutely, Reza. And one of the links you shared earlier was Java EE, Jakarta EE, and MicroProfile on Azure. And I know, Josh, you do a lot of work with MicroProfile. You're definitely keeping up on that technology. Have you had a chance to test it out on Azure?
Unfortunately, no, I have not. I have not worked much with Azure.
Okay.
Well, and from my perspective, and I was talking about this before the show. It's like, I have, like a lot of people, I have a lot more experience with AWS. I remember playing it in the early days, like before, when you actually could understand what all the services were in the console. You actually knew what they all were.
Right.
And so I know AWS the best. And occasionally I have a client that has some stuff on Azure, but and I played with it some, mostly for a talk I did on cloud functions. But what I've noticed though, and I imagine a lot of this has to do with the work of Reza and his team, is that I can, now it's very easy for me to go. These links will be in the show notes, by the way, at stackpodcast.com. I can go there to the Azure site and get step-by-step instructions about how to deploy whatever runtime I want that's Java-based on Azure, which to me is very compelling because when it comes to AWS or even Google to some extent, it's not always so clear. It's like, okay, I have a Quarkus app. How do I deploy it? Or, I've got this legacy JBoss app that I need to deploy. What's the best way to do it? And just to see guides on MicroProfile and stuff, I think is really, really compelling. For the speaker tracks project that I'm working on, we almost went to Azure, and the only reason we didn't is just because of time, because I know AWS. But like, given more time, I probably would have started there, because what we're doing is essentially running Quarkus on Postgres, which I think will be very easy to do in Azure. So
we want to help you out with that because we're working in that realm. But let me just jump in with a quick sort of picture into the mindset of how we are approaching delivering Java on Azure. And it's completely different from how our competitors are approaching Java on Azure. We're approaching Java on Azure first with a innovation happens elsewhere mindset. Now this phrase, innovation happens elsewhere, is something I learned from an open source pioneer who I knew from Sun by the name of Richard Gabriel. And he has a very interesting book that he wrote a long time ago called The Erotic Life of Code. And it's really kind of an open source manifesto and a seminal work in the open source movement. But the notion of innovation happens elsewhere is especially keen at Microsoft, because we know as the cloud provider, we need to get all of the workloads from all of the languages. And we're not in the business of picking favorites. If you want to run whatever you want on Azure, our job is to make the top of the funnel as wide as possible. So that's a totally different thing than the play that Microsoft used to give the play of like, okay, we're the single source, and you reuse our languages, our tools, our runtimes, and that approach doesn't work in the cloud. But what we're doing differently compared to our competitors is deep partnerships. I mentioned earlier, we're partnering with Oracle, IBM, and Red Hat, and this is what Reza and I do. We work directly with engineering teams, all of those app server vendors, to deliver our offerings. And then we also have a very deep integration with VMware for Azure Spring Apps, which is our premier best-in-class Java PaaS offering. So if you're a Spring developer, you really want to take a look at Azure Spring Apps, because it is the hand-in-glove treatment for doing Java on any public cloud. It's the most deeply integrated Java-based PaaS that you'll find on any of the big public clouds. So the secret sauce that we're hoping to bring to the table is bringing a Java native experience to the Java developers. So if you come to develop Java on Azure, you'll find Maven plugins. You already know how to use Maven plugins. You'll find IntelliJ. We have IntelliJ, Azure Toolkit for IntelliJ. So if you want to interact with you're a Java developer, you're probably an ace at using IntelliJ IDEA. And we have a toolkit that lets you deal with Azure directly from IntelliJ. Of course, we also have Visual Studio Code, and we have a really excellent Java integration there with tooling that works with all of the Azure services that we have. So we're trying to give Java developers an experience that they're already familiar with.
And I wish our colleague was here, guys. Dano, he would be jumping in on this, IntelliJ tools support with Microsoft discussion for sure. That's great. I mean, Ed, it's kind of surreal to see all these big company names on the same webpage listed together as supported, products. Like I'm used to seeing like IBM WebSphere, Oracle WebLogic, Red Hat JBoss. These were like opposite ends of a spectrum that you'd never see them working together in the same place. Like the app server wars, right? We're still used to that, the fierce competition, right, of the different app server vendors, the Java EE space. So to see them all supported in one environment, on one platform is pretty cool. Actually, I think that the secret sauce, you said, right? It's definitely a different approach than Microsoft the past. And I think developers tend to have a very favorable view today of Microsoft, especially with this level of support for different Java frameworks, products. So that's great.
So I just want to know, for Jakarta EE MicroProfile developers, we also have a PaaS offering for that as well. So that is JBoss EAP on App Service, and that is a fully managed experience for running JBoss EAP under the hood. But basically, JBoss EAP, as you may be aware, supports both Jakarta EE and MicroProfile as API. So yeah, we even have that covered. And in addition to that, obviously, we have a sort of an end-to-end strategy, right? Whatever the runtime may be, including things like Quarkus, Spring Boot, all of the Java EE runtimes, and then whatever destination you want. If you want a PaaS, we have that. When on Kubernetes, that's possible. VMs is possible. OpenShift is possible. In case of something like a Quarkus, if you want functions, we enable that as well. So it's really, whatever runtime, whatever type of cloud experience you want, and whatever runtime you would like to use in the Java ecosystem. So the objective really is enabling the entire ecosystem.
Interesting. Reza, I have a question for you on that. So is that audience like an enterprise type of customer, or do you see Azure being useful for like a developer, like solo developer or small development shops as well?
Mm-hmm. So the answer is yes or no, right? So, one of the things I try not to do is, try to stick to facts. The reality is Azure is by and large an enterprise cloud, right? So most of our customers that we are working with, even in the Java EE space, these are Fortune 500, 1,000 companies. The the customers that we talk to, these are typically not small companies. That they're bringing literally millions of dollars of revenue to Azure. But there is no particular reason why you wouldn't be successful, sort of as an indie developer or a small company. Fundamentally, these are just capabilities.
Is there a free tier or a kind of how does the price scaling work? Is there, like, for example, Red Hat OpenShift has a 2-week developer trial mode where you can spin up instances and deploy your application and get your feet wet as a developer. Is there a similar kind of experience for developers on Azure?
Yes, and it consists of two different mechanisms. So one mechanism is if you're a new customer and you're signing up new to Azure, you can sign up for a 1-year free subscription. And then honestly, you get pretty much all of Azure. For about a year, I believe it's $150 a month, which is, it's not a tremendous amount. If you're running one of these production workloads that we're talking about, you would run out of that very quickly. But 150 is pretty generous, to try things out. Once that 1-year subscription expires, you do have a free tier. So you don't get as many things, but you do get a lot of things. Still at the free tier, and that's essentially in perpetuity. Again, would you be able to run, a production workload on that free tier? No. Would you be able to experiment things? Yeah, absolutely. I think you can experiment with most things, and we do have that free tier mechanism for pretty much across the board. Certainly for our major services, for sure.
And so,
in terms of, go ahead.
One of the things that I've heard, I have no idea if this is a widespread perspective, but I have heard before, like, Azure is more expensive, and perhaps that was the case a couple of years ago, or maybe that was the case with the particular services they were using, or what. But I just wonder if you've heard that before.
It's a
I want to comment on that. It's go ahead, Reza. You're the first, but I want to get in.
So majority, in a way, one of the things I'm actually in my academic career, economics was one of the things that was a subject matter for me. But anyway, the way the economics of this works out, you have to be competitive. So to be honest, there is not a very big pricing difference between the large cloud vendors, AWS. Us and Google, it's about the same, for a majority of the things that you would want to use, things like Kubernetes and VMs and so on. Really, the differentiator has more to do with quality of service, right? So what type of thing can you run? For example, GCP and Amazon do not have a Spring PaaS. They do not have a Jakarta EE PaaS. whereas we do, right? So, there's those sort of differences, if you will. But in terms of like to like price, it's just about the same. Azure does have a few more data centers. I believe we have significantly more than GCP, a bit more than AWS. So it's competitive in some ways, certainly pricing wise, but it's comes to quality of service, right? Quality of service in terms of, I believe we have better managed services. I believe we do far better to cater to Java developers. Java EE developers. If you wanna take a look at that, you can take a look at the link that we shared, and I think it's fairly apparent. AWS and GCP do not have analogs of those. They do not cover the breadth and depth of things that we do. And lastly, I do think as a result of us being an enterprise cloud, we provide better support. So one of the things I shared with you, Kito, earlier is that migration survey. So I'll explain the purpose of that migration survey now. I think it's a good segue for that. Mm-hmm. So in addition to actually enabling this ecosystem and working with the partners to have all of these offerings, including PaaS offerings, one of the things Ed and I also do is we work with customers. So these are not things that are developed in an ivory tower somewhere in isolation from customers. We develop all of these things hand in hand with customers. Any number of these things that you see, there's at least one, in many cases, many more customers that we work with on each of these things. And there is an open door for customers as well. All a customer needs to do in order to work with my team and Ed and all of the rest of the engineers we have, all they need to do is fill out the survey to say, hey, this is the type of workload I want to run. Please help me. Please help me understand how that's going to run most successfully on Azure. So, I think pricing wise we're about the same, but I genuinely do think we're the better cloud, especially for Java developers.
I want to mention one aspect of the pricing wise, and we've heard that things are expensive, and one of the reasons we have this concept of cost of goods sold, right? So we have to account for all the cost of running the infrastructure, running the data centers, and all of that. That's one of the reasons why it is important that we like PaaS, because we can achieve higher density by packing the workloads, more workloads onto the same hardware at the expense of allowing Microsoft to run more and control more of the infrastructure. So it is a trade-off. If you're an enterprise and you want to run your own AKS clusters, then that's a little more expensive for us to offer you that much flexibility. Whereas if we say, here, just use our PaaS, then we can really take over the scheduling of the workloads in a way that's really much more optimal for minimizing cost of goods sold. But one other aspect that we're aware of is the need to scale to zero. So Kubernetes now has, the Azure Kubernetes service has the ability to consume $0 when you stop the cluster. So you can, if you set up your scaling rules correctly, you actually generate no Azure spend unless you're serving workload.
Nice.
Yeah, and also we're having some very exciting announcements coming up very soon about Azure Spring Apps on that front as well. I don't want to steal any thunder from that, but we have heard the need to scale to zero is a huge, huge factor for many enterprises for cost. And to, poster child for all of the, I don't know if that term is correct anymore. It just came out of my mouth because I'm from that era. Sorry about that. But the flag waver, the standard bearer for scale to zero, of course, is functions. And our entry in the function space is Azure Functions. And there is a very strong Java footprint there. The concept of durable functions, when you combine that with our Web Pub Sub framework, which is fully WebSocket compliant, gives you a really great ability to construct enterprise applications that scale to zero, but yet are functional and performant.
Right.
So the economist in me does instinctively do think the cloud prices are going to come down. I think there's a downward pressure. It's a topic amongst analysts. I don't see how there's not going to be. downward pressure on pricing, probably not just for Azure, but probably across the public cloud providers is my suspicion.
I was going to say the smaller organizations and companies that do not typically go to the cloud, they usually are still developing applications in terms of, having local application server deployments and smaller, maybe using some smaller cloud provider. Do you foresee, is there a good migration path for these particular customers to go to a smaller tier of Azure? And also, this one may be more for Ed, because I saw you're kind of in the tooling. Is it a good fit to use something like Visual Studio Code for developing applications locally and deploying to something local, like a local application server, or is it more geared towards Azure? Thank you.
Good question. And I'll say for VS Code, the answer is definitely yes. But one of the great aspects of working with VS Code for doing Java development on Azure is a very high degree of dev prod parity. So to spell it out for people who may not have heard the term before, if you haven't heard the term before, you've definitely experienced the problem where when you are working in your local developer environment, you get the thing working just fine, and then you deploy it to the app server using either manual or some kind of CI/CD thing, and then it behaves differently. The ability to do an exactly the same experience in development and production really eliminates a whole class of problems. And so Visual Studio Code works very well with that. One thing that I was super excited about when I joined Microsoft in 2019 was the Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL. And this technology has come a long way. It is a hypervisor-based VM solution for running running Linux on Windows. But the VSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, allows you to use Visual Studio Code, and there's integrations where everything just works correctly between the Windows side and the Linux side. And so once you have that, then of course you can bring Docker into the mix, and WSL has really, really great Docker integration. So, and of course, there is a Docker WSL extension for VS Code. So you can set up your whole container environment running on your local developer workstation that is Dockerized and containerized, and you can integrate with it with Visual Studio Code quite easily. But there's another technology that we have called Azure Bridge to Kubernetes, and it is a way to get full-scale Java debugger capability to your Java workload running inside an AKS cluster. So you can connect to it with the Java debugging port and set breakpoints, and you're just like you're running locally, but it's actually in the remote Kubernetes cluster.
Oh, that's awesome. I wanted to take a step back for the few people who are not familiar with cloud stuff that much. I'm sure there's a few people out there left. So can you guys explain? People often hear like, I put my stuff in a container and then I put it in the cloud, or I put it in a Kubernetes cluster or something. Can you explain like what that is compared to the platform as a service model? And I think, Josh, did I cut off the question for you? Did you?
Well, the initial question was if there's a good migration path for smaller developers, such as the ones you're discussing here. Yeah, so it's kind of similar question. No, that's fine. I appreciate it.
All right, let me answer Josh's question first. So the truth of the matter is there is sort of a continuum, right? So the cloud makes sense if you're a really small startup and you absolutely cannot manage any of your infrastructure. And that is, going to the cloud first is a headache-free way of making progress. On the other side, the opposite side of the spectrum, if you are an extremely large company and you're literally spending billions and millions on your data center, and in addition to that, you need personnel, you need people to manage all of that. The cloud can actually be very compelling because of economies of scale, and aside from infrastructure costs, potentially cut down on some of those personnel costs and in general get out of the IT business, if you will. And a lot of big businesses don't really want to be in the IT business. They're not that's not their specialty. So in a way, outsourcing that, if you will, for lack of better terms, to a cloud provider makes very straightforward sense. The problem, though, is that there is a middle of that continuum that's not so clear-cut. Right? So, if you do have a small deployment, and you do have, some people that can manage that infrastructure, and you do have a data center that's not too onerous, going to the cloud can be a questionable thing, right? What are you actually going to get, from that, in the end? So that's a dicey question, right? I don't know that there's really a straightforward answer to that, right? And I don't know that there ever will be a short of, like I said, the downward pricing pressure.
I appreciate the candid answer.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is part of what we need to do, what we are supposed to be doing as Microsoft as well. Is being transparent and honestly trying to do the right thing the best we can. Okay, Kito's question was around what is the difference between PaaS and containers? Containerization, basically what that gives you is higher, at the end of the day, it gives you higher density and greater, a better class of infrastructure, right? So you can basically do the same thing as you would do in containers and VMs. The problem with that is it's much lower density, right? Because you're unnecessarily creating, do a new deployment, you're unnecessarily creating another OS instance. Whereas if you're spinning up a container, it's a much thinner layer because it's really just spinning up another, if you will, literally a container, right? A very thin, subset of the underlying operating system and running that new instance on that. The other thing you get is, when you're running in something like a container environment, it's much richer than what a VM is able to do. It can do auto scaling, it can do, deployment on deployment very much more easily because of that, fundamentally because of that greater density. It can give you additional features like monitoring, management, all of the things that are in the Kubernetes cluster, or rather in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So the big difference between just deploying something on a PaaS is basically at the PaaS, what you're going to deploy ultimately is your highest deployment unit. So your WAR file or your jar file, right? So you can think about if you're on premises and somebody is managing the app server for you, you just log on to the app server console and then you upload your jar or your file, and that's your deployment unit from a developer perspective. Somewhat counterintuitively, in the container land, you actually have a bit more control as if you will, an end user, guy who's going to be writing the code at the end of the day. So what you're actually packaging in that case is your application and everything that your application is going to require in order to run itself. So your WAR or your file, potentially your or jar file, potentially your app server in there, and a small veneer of an operating system as well. So you literally sort of create, you're saying this is the environment that my application runs on. And that container can run locally, right? You can test it locally, the dev priority thing that Ed was mentioning before. And that same container, you'll just say, hey, you run this little mini environment in my data center, wherever that may be, and it's just going to spin up that in that particular environment for you. So it gives you, in a way, more control as a developer, what it is that you're going to be running.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Reza, about that. So you mentioned outsourcing IT, right? Like some companies may not want to deal with that server infrastructure management, data center management, and the overhead, the equipment and people costs that are associated with that. What about organizations that have more of a hybrid cloud approach where they have some applications in the cloud and some components running in-house or in a data center? How do you see those companies benefiting from Azure? Is there a hybrid cloud model as well, or is that also
I can't wait to tell you about it.
Go ahead.
We have a great thing. It's called Azure Hyperconverged Infrastructure, Azure HCI. And we actually have some guidance that one of our team members, Galia, did on the WebLogic side. And so basically, Azure HCI lets you run your Kubernetes in your local data center, but you manage it from a perspective that looks like it's a part of Azure. So there is some substrate technology that they have that the name is escaping me at the moment. But this sort of telemetry and control plane layer lets you get the Azure security guarantees, but you're running the Kubernetes platform inside on your own machine. So basically you sign up and order this specific hardware, and it comes pre-configured, and you just drop it in your data center, and then you can run hardware or run the software on that stack. And if you already have your own existing hardware, you have to make sure that it complies with the set of standards that we have. I think we can run it on existing hardware, but it has to have some guarantees for, of course, system requirements so that it can perform the necessary capabilities. But this telemetry layer that lets you manage it as if it's on the cloud, but it's actually running in your own data center behind your own network firewalls is really an exciting thing. And it just works. So we heard about the thing, and they're like, well, does it support Kubernetes? Yes, it does. Well, let's see if we can run WebLogic on it. Oh, yep. Look at that. It works just great. So there you go. Java EE on the cloud, but in a hyper-converged hybrid fashion.
That's awesome, Ed. And I really enjoy your enthusiasm about Kubernetes. I share the same enthusiasm, and I think it's an amazing technology, Docker and containerization and orchestration. And it just really is quite liberating, right? As a developer, you don't have to worry as much about whether your code will work or not. And it just the ability, the performance too, like being able to push a commit that builds an image and then instantly gets deployed somewhere. It's so much smoother in terms of CI/CD. And I think, containers are great. That's cool. I didn't know about this Azure HCI product too. That's cool.
Very cool.
At a fundamental level, to be honest, most of our customers are effectively hybrid customers, and hybrid means different things, right? To keep it short, though, it's not necessarily that complicated. We have this technology called Express Route, and that is basically setting up a VPN between Azure and your data center. Basically, you can have certain parts of your application running on Azure, certain parts running on premise. Very common scenario is, database is running on premise and the application is running on Azure. All of that is frankly as simple as setting up that express route connection that acts as a VPN between your data center and Azure.
And just browsing this webpage too, Reza, the information about HCI, it sounds like security is a big part of it too, right? Like, is there some audit compliance benefits, or does Microsoft help with the security hardening of your infrastructure side of things?
Yeah, and this is actually yet another reason why some customers move to the public cloud, contrary to how this entire cloud journey actually started and the type of criticism that was there before. So yeah, actually, anecdotally, Azure actually is, you can consider it the most secure cloud because we actually have the most security certifications. More pragmatically speaking, public cloud providers are a huge target for many malicious actors, basically, right? So we have a very extensive security mechanism, starting from physical security at our data centers all the way to black hat hackers that are working for us, trying to break into our own systems. And your average company is not going to have those kind of resources and those type of abilities to secure their infrastructure and kind of investment that the typical public cloud provider actually puts in. So contrary to what concerns that people had, the reality of it actually is that you are more secure running on a public cloud provider than you would be trying to manage your own security in your own data center.
Can you speak to FedRAMP at all? Is Azure?
Oh, yeah, that's
FedRAMP
exactly what I
compliant?
was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, we have essentially our own data centers that are even more secure. I don't want to get into that, but we have some very, very serious stuff running on Azure, sort of in their own data center almost, right? That is even more secure than our typical data centers. Most of those you have government cloud, what we call gov cloud. That is essentially separate infrastructure.
Okay.
Sure,
Yeah.
so I imagine there's different licensing for each of that, depending
Yeah.
upon what kind of security you'd like.
I've definitely worked with that on the AWS side. So yeah, so seeing it here is nice to see. Yeah, I see FedRAMP and everything. Cool. I have another question, and then I think I want to get into some of the topics that you had wanted to discuss, Reza, since we're running a bit long. But I one of the things that working with AWS a lot that we ended up using was local stack. Because local stack allows you to basically run all the AWS APIs locally, basically. So you can run all your integration tests against them. That was our main use case, but you could also run stuff locally as well. But local stack is an open source product. There's a commercial version. It's third party. I think AWS may have something on their own, from AWS that lets you do this now. But the main thing was the use case was, I'm using all these APIs from my cloud vendor. I want to be able to run integration tests without relying on the cloud vendor. How do I do it? So how does that work in the Azure space?
So we have things here and there that address this problem. We do not have a holistic answer as of yet. So yes, there is no good answer for everything. Things like functions. One of the interesting things is you can actually run functions locally.
I noticed that when I was researching it. It's pretty well.
You can't do that on Amazon or Google, for example, right? So there's things here and there like that. It's anecdotal where you can run things locally, but I would say it's that we don't have a holistic solution to that.
Okay, cool. All right, so in the interest of time, Reza, there were a couple of things you wanted to discuss in particular, and I believe one of them was Jakarta EE 11.
Correct. Yeah, so this is the thing that Ed is actually going to be talking about in the Jakarta EE specification committee on Tuesday. But
okay.
If you don't get a chance to attend that, the Jakarta EE 11 planning is happening now, and it needs input, and frankly, it can use some injection of enthusiasm as well, external enthusiasm. And as you and Josh know, we in the ambassador side of things, we're actually way ahead of that. So we have a contribution guide, that we all put our input into, and that has been out for a little while. So if you are an open source developer out there, looking to contribute to something, I don't know how much more easier it can get. You just read the Jakarta 11 contribution guide, see what features are compelling to you, and go and start pushing that work forward. So I did put a link to the contribution guide. Did share that with you. Hopefully it'll be in the show notes.
Yep, it'll be there, definitely. And I think what I was thinking about this the other day, it's like, if you actually want to contribute to something that people use, it's kind of a good choice, if you're using any of this stuff. And remember, Jakarta EE could be JAX-RS, could be JPA, could be Servlet, could be, dozens of other APIs that as you use any of these and you want to affect them positively, it's kind of an easy way to get involved with something that people actually use.
I don't know how many people have tried to contribute to open source, but not every single open source project is that easy to contribute to necessarily. It's the opposite for most of the Jakarta EE projects. They're actively looking for contributors. And it doesn't have to be a big contribution. It could be as simple as, can you help improve the website? Right.
Yeah, or can you test this thing out? Or can you, bug reports are good too. Everything.
Definitely, I agree.
Yeah. So the contribution guide for Jakarta EE 11 is on the show notes, and which are stackpodcast.com. And Jakarta EE 11 is, what's the current schedule? It's early next year. Is that the current?
2024. Yeah. So probably last quarter of something like late 2024.
Okay, so late this year. Okay, gotcha.
Late next year.
We're
in 2023.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I keep on, honestly, I just got 2023 stuck in my head and I'm already jumping ahead. So yeah. All right, late next year. Okay, cool. And you said, so Microsoft is now involved with Jakarta EE, or Jakarta EE.
Correct. Yeah, we're both and MicroProfile. Yeah, we're both part of both working groups. Okay,
cool. And what is, I know, and what's interesting about you, Reza, you sort of wear two hats. You sort of wear the Reza long-term Jakarta EE enthusiast hat, and then the official Microsoft hat. So from your perspective, I know there's different perspectives. So what do you like when you look at like all those technologies, under the Jakarta EE and MicroProfile umbrellas? What do you want to see with both hats going forward?
So it's, for me, honestly, the answer is very, very simple and complicated at the same time. So all of the things that, you, me, Josh, all the ambassadors have worked on and put together in the 11 contribution guide, frankly, I can't think of a single thing that I would look in there and say, oh, that's not important, right? I think they're all important. One of the things that, it makes me somewhat sad when I say this, I've been trying to make the case for replacing EJB since Java EE7. And it's happening, but very slowly, right? It's like we have the add transactional annotation. We just had the add asynchronous annotation finally in EE10, but there's a whole bunch. And the big one is message-driven beans, right? So I think finally saying, hey, we have replaced EJB in the platform, I think that is a marketing value proposition that a lot of people underestimate, to be able to finally say, hey, by the way, it's J2E no more. The thing that you most associate with J2E, that is done. In Jakarta EE, you don't need that thing anymore. To me, that is sort of a cause that I continue to try to advocate because I do genuinely believe there is value in doing that work.
Yeah, people that remember J2EE or work with Java EE certainly do attribute or associate EJB to the older days, and they don't typically think of EJB as a lightweight, specification, something that you can easily use and can still utilize with microservices and applications and solutions such as this. So I could definitely see getting rid of that being a benefit for future of Jakarta EE.
Yeah, definitely. I think
I was lucky to learn EJB around the version 3 of the spec and Java EE6. And for me, it was quite a lightweight approach I just really enjoyed the whole container managed transaction idea, that this thing's starting, stopping transactions for me. I knew about the EJB 2.x overhead and actually studied a little bit of that with the remote interface, the local interface, and all that extra overhead stuff you had to deal with. But it was, it was a legacy, like part of the RMI history of Java, right? That they came from that spec and added some enhancements on top. But yeah, to say like, hey, let's remove EJB. I know it's, why it has that stigma. It's because of Spring, obviously. I mean, that was the raison d'etre of Spring, was like, look, transactions without EJBs, and dependency injection.
You know what the title of Rod Johnson's famous book was, right? It was called J2EE without EJB. And Spring Framework itself started life as the demo application in that book. So that's where he got the idea to do Spring. And not only did they, the story I tell is that they went very far, very fast with operational excellence because they were able to be a single vendor and not have to do any kind of consensus building like we did in the Java EE world. In order for us to take a single step forward, we had to get buy-in from all of the JCB participants at the time. And I'm a firm believer in community-based development as being a better approach, especially for developers, because you can have a larger say. I always point to Facebook as Facebook was the big proof point of that. But on the other side, Spring was able to create a product excellence that simply could not be achieved with the least common denominator solutions that we often had with the app server vendors. And then that's a fact. But one thing they did on top of that was really made a lot of hay with the bad experience that was out there with J2EE and EJB. And that wasn't really true since 6. All of that was really, all those problems that Brad was talking about in his J2EE without EJB book, they had been solved correctly with CEI and 1.0 by the time that the Java EE6 came along. But the marketing material that Spring was putting out was still, very much taking pot shots that were no longer fair to take. But, that's how it's a business, and it's a competitive business. And so that's part of the piece that the historical record will show.
Yep. And just to build upon that, if you take a poll of users out there who are developing enterprise applications, it really is still in the majority of individuals are using Spring to develop enterprise applications. So.
Yep. And they still benefit from that ability to not have to worry about consensus, right? They can just come up with a new API. I've been paying attention to the GraphQL space a lot, and there's MicroProfile GraphQL, but now there's Spring GraphQL, which is basically just an adoption of an existing open source project. So they can do that without worrying about writing a spec and all that kind of stuff, which is
it seems that was the strategy for Spring for a lot of these things. Is like, here's a tricky API. Let's make it simple for developers. LDAP, how do you call query LDAP? Gosh, what a nightmare. JNDI, no, please. And then suddenly it's like, a couple annotations, boom, you have your data, like in XML or annotation.
It's sort of like the Apple model. It just struck me. That model, you look at the market and then you come up with your own version of it, which is a little bit simpler to use, but maybe not quite as powerful.
That's why I call it the operational excellence. I mean, they definitely brought value to developers, so no one can question that. But that value comes kind of at the expense of openness in some cases. And especially if you want to be a contributor to Spring, it is an open source project, but the ability to get your voice heard and have an impact has a higher bar, I think, in the Spring ecosystem than it does in the Java EE ecosystem.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Definitely. One of the things I wanted to mention, we should probably start wrapping up, but I did want to mention one thing. We were talking about this before we recorded, but I thought I would just reminisce for a minute here. So I, just for those of you who don't know, way back in the day, I ran a conference called JSF1, and then Oracle sent me, or was it Sun at the time? I think it was Oracle at the time. They sent me an email and said, hey, or maybe it was Sun, I can't remember. But they said JSF1 sounds too much like Java 1, so we changed the name to JSF Summit. But it was a conference about JavaServer Faces. We only did it for maybe 2 or 3 years. I think it was 3 years. And that's how I met Ian. Ian I'd known from his JSF for Dreambox tool, but he was one of the presenters at JSF Summit in Orlando, and that's where Ed lives. So Ed was there, of course, and it was one of those magical times, long time ago. We were all much younger, had much less gray hair, and there are two distinct memories I had. One was we were at the bar at the hotel, and I'm big on in terms of drinking. I'm more of like a Scotch. I think back then I was into cognac, but I'm more of that kind of person. I can taste what's in my drink. I know what it does. I was never into mixed drinks, but Ian gave me this blue drink, and he was like, "You have to try this." And I tried it, and I don't remember how many I had after that. It was a
lot.
Yes, it was a lot. And I have vague memories of lots of laughing and Ed playing the piano, the bar piano.
That's right.
I don't know if they told you to stop playing the piano after a while, Ed, or not, but that was a
I
fun.
used to do that a lot.
Okay. Yeah,
that was an epic night. I remember that we were just all mingling in the hotel bar, and there was these blue drinks going around. I was so intrigued. I had to have one, and next thing you know, all my newly formed friends are having one too, and it was quite a bender that night. I think there was a lot of alcohol consumed, but it was a nice introduction to the conference experience for me. So I really enjoyed that, and also being there with all these high energy and people, really smart individuals, and sharing, doing presentations on my plugins for Dreamweaver, and it was just exciting to be involved with the JSF community at that stage. So, and Kito, the several conferences we did together, flying out to San Francisco and having dinner with you, and the founder, for one of the guys from Artifactory, the JFrog guy, if you remember, and we had some really good times together. I remember, again, Orlando with Ed, of course, was one of the best times ever, and it was just, again, high energy, really interesting stuff, and a lot of good times.
So and Ed had this party, right, Ed? You want to talk about that?
That's right. Because we were this was like the highlight of my career, in the sense that I worked for years to get a really open, collaborative, fun community of developers built around JSF. And Kito had built a conference, JSF Summit. And I remember you had partnered with, was it Jay Zimmerman?
Yeah.
So he was doing a thing at the time called the Rich Web Experience. And you basically had, I think, 1 or 2 tracks in his thing in Orlando. And that was the JSF portion of the conference. And so, since it was there in Orlando, and I live in Orlando, I decided, well, we had all these speakers coming, and we wanted to get, have a little gathering after the conference was over at my house, and we had everyone over there. Chitai Savici from Prime Faces, Martin Norinchik from My Faces was there, Neil Griffin, who also lives in Orlando area, and Vernon Singleton, they were there from LifeRay. And we also had some people from Ice Faces too. I forget the name of the gentleman from Canada, but he was there. And then who was the tall guy who did the SEO solution for JSF? Baxter, I think was his name.
Oh, Lincoln Baxter. Yes. What was it?
Lincoln Baxter the third. Right.
Yes. Lincoln. Yes.
He was there too. Yes.
There's a funny aside, then we can go back to the story. Lincoln now, he runs a company that has an app for Magic the Gathering.
Really?
Yeah, that's his main thing.
Does it do anything with crypto?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I hope not.
Yeah, I don't think it's a crypto based. I think it's more if you're into that game, that's one of the tools you can use. Anyways,
okay.
But yeah, that was a fun night, and I remember. Yeah,
so I wasn't.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I wasn't part of that night, and I wasn't at that party. I'm not sure that I had been to a conference at that point. I'm not sure what year that was.
I think it was 2008. Okay, I still have a T-shirt. I'm very proud of the T-shirt.
Yes, it is 2008.
Here's a funny story.
Go ahead.
It's a tie-dye T-shirt. So the funny story is I'm happy to say that I must have some kind of continued relevance, because I have the JSF1 T-shirt from 2008. My name is on the top of it. And then last summer, I spoke at this new conference in Germany called Cloudland. And that was at Phantasialand in rural Germany, where JavaLand is also held. It's the theme park. So it's a really great place for a conference. If you ever get a chance to go to either JavaLand or Cloudland in Germany, and you want to mix your conference experience with riding on actual roller coasters, that's a good thing to do. but I had the chance to speak at that, and my name was on the T-shirt, and that was just last summer. So I'm like, okay, 2008 through 2022, I can't complain. It's a pretty good run of relevance.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was awesome. I remember at your party, I was really impressed. You had the retro Atari system all set up, and
right.
Remember watching some Grateful Dead videos with you. It was super cool. It was just really nice hanging out.
Yeah, we did a lot of fun. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I wanted to just mention though, I had gotten into JSF around, had to be 2004, 2005 era, you know, way back when it was first, you know, getting going.
1.2.
Yeah, and I was and I had read all the documentation, and I had gotten into some of the online, discussions and whatnot. And I didn't make to my first Java 1, I think, until 2010. But then when I was there, I saw you, Ed, and I was basically starstruck. I also met Arun, and when I was after one of his sessions, he gave me a glassfish beanie, and I still wear that thing all the time. And I also met you. Reza, and that was great. That's kind of what got me into going to conferences and really
cool.
into participating in the community. Just for anyone out there who is not sure about going to a conference or they think they can just do online documentation, reading, and definitely go to a conference if you have a chance. So you get to meet these people, and it really gets you involved more into the immersive experience of being a developer in that community.
And what I like about it is I don't know, it's like you kind of remember like we're all people at the end of the day, right? So and the relationships are important. So that's one of the things I take away. I remember seeing you, Reza, at the server side symposiums a lot in Las Vegas. I remember seeing you and Josh Long there a lot, way back in the day.
I remember TSSJS. Yep.
Yep. There's some fun times. So
I got a question for Ed before I have the opportunity. So Ed, one thing that impressed me the most about your setup was that you had a treadmill and you have a stand-up desk able to run and work at the same time. And I thought like, wow, man, this guy's really together. He's like super healthy, focused. And then I saw recently you posted, I think on Twitter or Mastodon, you showed a picture of yourself working, floating in your pool. I have to say, like you've taken it to a new level.
What? You're floating in a pool? What?
This is swimming pool.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah. So this was just a relaxing thing. So I had been it's a picture. I was reading I think it was 2 months ago, edition of Communications of the ACM. Had really a lot of good coverage of Copilot and ChatGPT, and particularly its impact on computer science education. So it was Martin Luther King Day, so I had the day off, and I was just floating around in the pool in my little inflatable kayak, reading my Communications of the ACM, and I thought, oh, this is a good thing to post. What was I up to on MLK Day? I was reading about reading Communications of the ACM.
Master of work-life balance, Ed, I have to say.
Well, you were a trailblazer, having a stand-up desk and a treadmill desk back then. That was pretty.
Well, I had no choice. I had to, stay healthy. I've been very fortunate that I've been phoning it in since 2002. So, and I thank my manager at the time, Mimi Hills at Sun, and Sun was also a trailblazing company in many, many ways, but one of theirs was the ability to support remote work. Does anyone remember the thing called a Sunray?
Yeah.
So Sunray was, it had a Java card in it. So this was a smart card that actually had Java running in the card. And if you wanted to work from home and you worked at Sun, you could sign up in the work from home program, and they'd give you a Sunray, which was a thin desktop client, and it would run a compressed version of the X protocol. And you would have Sunray servers, and it was super, super secure because there was no data kept locally. It was all remote display. And now Azure has this thing called Windows 365, which is a virtual desktop infrastructure that does kind of a similar thing with commodity desktop hardware rather than being a bespoke hardware that you had to buy directly from Sun, even though they were dirt cheap. These Sun rays were really not expensive to make. And that was one of the things that I was sad to see go away when Oracle eventually started divesting themselves of all of the Sun hardware business.
Right.
But Sun was able to do it.
I was just thinking about that the other day because I just read about how Google Cloud is they are bringing people. No, that's what it is. They're people who like have a desk and only show up like 2 or 3 days a week. They're basically combining people at the same desk. And it's this whole big deal. And I'm like, Sun had that down back in the day. Like there were like remote offices you could just go to, right? And you could just
sure.
Right. And it's like you could just go to the office when you needed to. It was dynamic and there wasn't any of this like weird sharing stuff, it was all shared, right?
I know.
Preaching to the choir. All right. So before we move on to the picks, anyone else have anything important they wanted to bring that we left out? I know we had a lot of topics, which we'll probably have to get to next week. But anyone else? Okay. All right. So
I want to put a link in the show notes. So if you go to aka.ms/java/EE, that is the landing page for Java EE and Jakarta EE at Microsoft.
I think that's the one. No, that's actually different than the one we have. Okay.
You guys have the best URLs, by the way. I think that's so cool. These are short 6-character.
The link shortener is really handy. I like it.
Wait, so what is it? It's aka.ms
/Java/EE.
Okay, gotcha. All right, cool.
That will redirect you to the landing page for Java EE.
Okay, cool. All right, so picks. So we're just going to talk about some cool things that we found. I just wanted to mention this app that I've been using for many years called Infinilog. INFI.
Oh, I've heard of it. I've not used it though.
Yeah, well, I got this. I learned about it from this book I read many years ago, which I'll put in the show notes as well, called The Healthy Programmer. I have no idea how relevant it is now, but I think some of it's still relevant. Probably the key thing I got from that is to go for a walk or exercise every day. But they also mentioned using this Infinilog app, and basically it's just a little database, right? You can just log whatever you want. You can, and everything can have a time scale, and you can go back in history and see graphs. So I use it as a way to track something I'm doing so that I can change the behavior. So for something I don't like, I can track it every day. I was doing weight at one point. When COVID started, I was counting how much I was drinking to sort of say, okay, this is how many. So if I cut back, this is what happened. And lately, I also use it to keep track of all the light bulbs in my house, what kind they are, where they are. I take pictures. This light bulb in this location is this type. This has this many lumens, etc. So it's just a handy little logging tool. Just a fun thing to have, and it's like $2 or something. And you can also export to PDF and CSV and all that kind of stuff. So, anyways, that's my pick. All right. Let's see. Josh, you have a pick.
Yeah, I have a pick. It's this is something I think if you like taking notes on your machine, on your iPad, phone, Mac, especially. I'm not sure that it works with Windows. Sorry, folks. But this is a tool called Agenda. It's a note-taking application that is date focused. That's the difference between this. You can actually assign dates to all these notes, and you can bring up your calendar and see all of your notes in calendar format, which is it's pretty nice and enables me to go ahead and set up. So I have all my meetings in the calendar, and I just click on them and create the note automatically that's tied to the meetings. And I can start taking my notes and have everything organized that way. It's all searchable. You can create smart search links, and I can create different projects and organize it. Great tool. Just wanted to mention it. It's called Agenda, something I find really handy. And they've also, in more recent versions, enabled better formatting for like code and things like that. So it's been pretty handy.
Is it sort of like an Evernote Lite? sort of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of like a lighter version, but you can still do just about everything you do with Evernote, I would imagine. The most compelling reason to use it is the date focus, ecosystem that is involved with it, because your calendar is right on the right-hand side. Just pick the day and all your notes come up for that day, and it really helps you, navigate your notes and what you're thinking and thought process and organization. It's really good.
Cool. Okay, nice. All right, Reza, you had a pick for us.
Yes, very briefly, it's a book. I just finished reading it actually, and I found it somewhat accidentally, actually. So the name of the book is Courage to be Disliked. Obviously, it's a bit of a provocative title on purpose, but really what the book is about is authenticity. I think it will appeal to a lot of people, especially in our industry. We tend to be more introverts than extroverts, and we sometimes feel insecure about that. We think there's something wrong with us if that is really what we are. But this is a book that will hopefully, sort of make you think you are okay, right? And it is okay to be authentic and true to yourself, and frankly, to stop worrying about what anybody else thinks of you and why that is actually a healthy way of living. It's a book by two Japanese authors, interestingly enough. So it's definitely. There's an anti-consumerist ethos definitely to it. In a way, in a consumer society, you are a commodity. You're under pressure to be liked, to sell yourself, if you will. So there is a bit of a anti-consumerist ethos to the book, which also appeals to me personally, other than the introverted thing, of course. So again, Courage to be Disliked. I gave you the link to Amazon.
Yep, it'll be in the show notes. Cool. All right, so just to wrap up, we are.
Hey, let me get mine in there, right?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So for me, I'm going to take the plunge and tell people, you can, and maybe even should, consider using a full-featured issue tracker for your personal life. So a few years ago, I decided to get myself a Jira subscription, and I created epics and user stories and for all of the aspects of my life. So I have one for, like, I call it physical plant, for stuff that I have to maintain on the house. Like my washing machine broke recently, so I have created a user story in the current sprint for that. And then I have one for, financial stuff. I have one for healthcare stuff, and I combine that with having a private GitHub repo where I have Git LFS installed, and I have all of my invoices and receipts and whatever else is a private repo in GitHub, and combine that with my personal Jira, and it's really a great way to keep track of all of the stuff that one has to mess with nowadays in your life, and never lose things anymore. So it's being able to leverage GitHub search for, like, I think I paid this bill a long time ago. Why are you coming to me again? Oh, here's the invoice. Or I got a new roof in 2011. What kind of shingle did I use? Oh yeah, here it is. Because I had to get a roof repair, and they need to order the same kind of shingle. So being able to do records retention using our software development tools is actually a really good thing.
That's cool. Yeah, it's funny because the issue tracker using Jira, I use Noseby, which is a task manager, but there's a lot of similarities, so I can totally see that. Using Git for all the documentation is interesting. Huh, fascinating. Yeah, I put everything in Google Drive, which may not be the best place, but it seems to work. All right, cool. So just saying, we're part of the PaaS network, which has a couple other awesome podcasts. One is called Off Heap, and one is called Java PubHouse. So you can check them all out at pubhouse.net. And also we have some events coming up. DevNexus is in Atlanta, Georgia, April 4th through 6th, and I will be there. Will anyone else be there that I know? That's right. Of course, you'll be there. There's actually a Jakarta EE track, I should mention, at DevNexus. So Reza, Josh, and I will be there. So that'll be fun. And that's a great conference if you have a chance to check it out. And also, I think they do have a discount for, I think if you've recently been laid off or something. So you should go to the site. I'm sure you can find a link for it there.
That's really good that they have that. That's really smart.
I thought that was nice. There's J Alba, which I've never heard of before, but it sounded interesting. It's in Edinburgh, Scotland, May 4th through 6th. JCon Europe, which Reza and I are on the content board for. That is in Cologne, Germany, June 20th, 23rd. Gateway Software Symposium, March 31st through April 1st, excuse me. And where is that located? Normally Dano does these, so I don't really know where any of these are. Yes, that is in St. Louis. Okay. And the Pacific Northwest Software Symposium, which I believe is in Washington. J Prime in Sofia, Bulgaria, May 30th through 31st. Central Iowa Software Symposium, June 9th through 10th. And Lone Star Software Symposium, which is in Austin this year, July 14th through 15th. The venerable UberConf, which is another No Fluff Just Stuff conference, July 18th through 21st. And UberConf is in Denver, Colorado. I will be there this year, and I believe Dana will be at a lot of these as well. And of course, you can always find the JH Champions conference sessions online on YouTube. We'll put a link for that in the show notes as well. And this is something I do a lot. If there's an online conference, even if I'm speaking at it, I often am not there the whole time, but I will go back over time and just listen to the sessions on YouTube, watch them on YouTube. So highly recommend you do that. There's lots of great talks at jchampionsconf.com. So, all right. I think we've come to another.
I want to mention there's JavaLand. JavaLand is in Ruhl, Germany, near Cologne, and that is March 21st through 24th this year.
Thank you. Thank you. We will add that to the show. I knew we were missing something.
Is any of that going to be online at all, or?
I believe that's all in person now, but they will have the recordings available afterwards.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, I want to extend a very warm felt welcome and thank you to Reza and Ed. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.
And hopefully we'll have you guys back again one day. Tell us next year how much the Microsoft chatbot has taken over Azure and everything.
Oh boy, yeah.
So that'll be
great to see you. Great to talk to you.
So thanks again.
Good talking to you, guys.
All right, thank you. And we will see all of you who listen at sometime in the next month or so. And as always, you can find the show notes and previous episodes at stackpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.